Prepare to experience the strongest radio allowable by law. Secrets will be revealed. Myths dispelled. From the studio gym where excuses never apply, it's Superhuman Radio with your host, Carl Lenore.
One of the things that probably sets people in this audience apart from the average weekend warrior is that we want progress. We want to lift more. We want to see increases in the size of our muscles. We want to see increases in performance. And as a result, we're always looking for metrics to gauge our progress because, let's face it, nobody wants to be on a road without knowing that they're going in the right direction. And for a long time, there has been discussions on both sides of the table as it relates to whether or not muscle soreness is a requisite portion of those changes in the muscle that indicate you are getting new muscle growth and stronger. Brad Schoenfeld is on the show. How you doing, Brad?
I'm doing great. Great to be back.
Brad, and for those of you who don't know, Brad is an internationally recognized fitness expert, and he has a great website that the name says it all, lookgreatnaked.com, which is obviously everybody aspires to look great without clothes on. That is the benchmark of whether or not you're doing well at your program. And you and another friend of the show, Brett Contreras, just recently published a paper. And the paper looks at whether or not, specifically post-exercise soreness, is indicative of muscular adaptations that lead to larger, stronger muscles. So you looked at this was an analysis of what a universe of research that was out there already, correct?
Yeah, basically we took a complete look at the literature, and then we offered practical applications based upon the evidence.
Okay, so let's first of all identify what we're talking about here in muscle soreness. There is a phenomenon called delayed onset muscle soreness, which usually occurs sometimes not even the next day, but the day after that, the second or third day, where you really notice that your muscles are hurting you. Is that what we're talking about in this particular study?
That's correct, and it's distinct from soreness that would be due to injury. So this really, and kind of it's semantics because there's an injury aspect to muscle damage, but the injury, you can talk about muscle damage as being an injury, but it really depends on the extent of the damage. So injuries, you can get a tiny cut on your finger. That's not the same as getting a huge slit on your wrist. So
you know what I love? I love the word that you scientists use, and that is insult, right? Some insults can hurt, and some insults can foster personal growth.
Correct.
It just depends on whether the insult is one that is designed to do such collateral damage that you cannot recover from it, or it's designed to do an amount of damage that forces you to overcompensate or supercompensate. So DOMS apparently is the latter. It's the type of insult to the muscle that stimulates growth, the upregulation of the muscle to prepare itself for the next
not DOMS. So now that's two different things. DOMS is the soreness that has some association with the damage. So there's muscle damage. What we're talking about is the damage that's done to the muscle. And so why don't we get into this? Exercise-induced muscle damage. I guess I'm sorry. I combined these. EIMD. Yeah. That's exactly right. So post-exercise, when you work out, you're going to get small microscopic tears within a fiber, and the damage is going to be specific. It can happen at the sarcolemma, which is the membrane of the muscle. It can happen to the contractile element. So it can involve many different aspects of the muscle, and there's different degrees, and you can think of it like a sunburn or going out in the sun. So you can get a very mild redness the first time you go out in the sun, and that really doesn't hurt or anything, and it over time, if you keep doing this, you can get tan from that. The body will adapt. Whereas if you go out and just get blistered, you stay out with light skin 8 hours in the sun, and you get blistered, well then basically you have macro damage, if you will, where you've really you've provided an insult that is beyond your body's ability to properly repair. So this, what we're talking about here, can be anywhere in between. So soreness can happen, you can get mild soreness, you can get moderate soreness, or you can get severe soreness, depending on the extent of what has happened to the tissue.
Interesting. Okay, so is delayed onset muscle soreness a necessary byproduct of exercise-induced muscle damage?
Well, before answering that, let's actually discuss what the soreness is due to. So the damage itself causes a sensitization of what are called nociceptors, which are sensory receptors that signal pain in the body. And there are it sets off this cascade of events. You're going to get various cytokines such as neutrophils and other substances that are drawn, and free radicals as well, that are drawn into the area of damage and that are going to interact with the free nerves, with the exposed nerves, and they're going to cause this pain response, and depending upon multiple factors. So genetics is going to enter into the pain response. How well trained you are previously is going to enter into this, and obviously the extent of the damage itself. So multiple factors will enter into this. And ultimately, as you mentioned early on, this can last for anywhere from 24 to 48 hours, and it's often accompanied with edema, which is swelling around the area, which is an inflammatory response. You'll get this localized fluid accumulation, and that can exacerbate the feeling of soreness. So now, with that as background, let's answer your question. Muscle damage, and I'm going to answer this in kind of a roundabout way,
okay,
as I sometimes do, but muscle damage, and I actually wrote a paper on this, a review paper published in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research about a year or so ago now, on the effects of whether muscle damage actually does promote a hypertrophic response, and the jury is still somewhat out, but there is pretty compelling evidence that it can enhance the response, so that there are various factors associated with this damage where the body wants to repair. There's a need for an adaptive response where not only does the body want to repair what's happened, but it wants to do so in a way so that the next time you subject it to the same insult, if you will, or overload, the body will be more prepared for it. And there's multiple mechanisms that are theorized that's going to drive this, including increased satellite cells, which have been shown through muscle damage, and satellite cells, as we know, we've talked about this in the past, help to promote greater not only repair but protein synthesis. They actually donate nuclei to the muscle. And there are various other substances, inflammatory substances, which are thought to enhance the growth process. So the fact that you have damage and that muscle soreness is somewhat correlated to the damage would tend to suggest that, you can gauge your workout based on damage. Now, that is a little, while seeming logical, that we'd be taking somewhat of a leap if we really thought that. And what it comes down to is that, number one, the time course of soreness does not necessarily line up, meaning that how long you're sore for does not necessarily line up with the repair of the tissue, and even to the extent of the damage. So that's number one. So there's other factors that soreness are thought to occur from, and it also can include other connective tissue elements within the muscle rather than the damage to the tissue itself, and connective tissue is not what we care about when we're looking for hypertrophy.
Right.
And what's even more important here is that the body has an adaptive response whereby the more you train, there's something called the repeated bout effect, where it's going to get less sore over time. And what we've learned is that people can get very sore and not really be growing very much, and people cannot get sore and be achieving very robust growth. So bottom line here is that while soreness can be indicative of training the muscle in a somewhat novel way, which can be beneficial, it should not be used as a gauge for whether you've had a quality workout, because you can be, like I said, growing without any soreness whatsoever.
Okay, that makes perfect sense, and that opens up a lot of other discussions that we're going to have here in just a minute. We're going to take a quick commercial break. There are lots of concerns about food supply today. That's why you need White Oak Pastures. White Oak Pastures will deliver food right to your doorstep. You don't even have to go out and be disappointed by shopping in grocery stores. The finest beef, pork, lamb, duck, and more can be found at White Oak Pastures. And now they even have seafood. And best of all, White Oak Pastures has a negative carbon footprint, which means that you don't have to feel guilty for eating your ribeye. Go to shrnetwork.biz/whiteoak and use the code SUPERHUMAN to save 15% off. Never before has a product been so appropriately named as Botanic Tonics Feel Free. This plant-based elixir combines a variety of different effective compounds, all from raw plant materials that at different doses provide you with completely different experiences. A third of a bottle puts you in the zone and makes you very focused and is ideal for a non-stimulating pre-workout. It also has a mild analgesic effect for us older lifters who have soreness and little pains and aches that keep us from training as ferociously as we want. A half a bottle will create a mild euphoric effect that will allow you to forego consuming alcohol but still be socially lubricated and have fun. I have never had a product deliver on its name the way Botanic Tonics Feel Free does, and I won't ever be without it, and you shouldn't either. Go to shrnetwork.biz/feelfree and use the code SHR40 for 40% off your first order. I promise you, you will not be disappointed. GHKCU is one of the most effective peptides for rebuilding more youthful skin, reversing skin damage, diminishing wrinkles, and tightening loose skin. I personally use Restoracell with GHKCU every day. It's making an undeniable difference in the quality of my skin. Restoracell is fantastic for all types of skin. Now you can order Restoracell and save 25% when you use the code SHR25. That's SHR25. While you may be diligent in your workouts and your diet,
Jumping higher, lifting more. It's Superhuman Radio.
That's your skin. We're talking with Brad Schoenfeld. We're talking about
/blue
whether or not you need to feel sore
SHR25
to make progress
today
in the gym. Okay, so let's kind of examine a couple things here, Brad. So obviously, the more frequently you train, the more resistant you become to delayed onset muscle soreness. This was just experienced by myself, where I took a prolonged period of time off, 2 weeks from the gym after tearing a hamstring, and went in and trained chest, shoulders, and back one day and felt a small amount of soreness that I normally don't feel from training those body parts. So, if there is any beneficial effects from delayed onset muscle soreness in the exercise-induced muscle damage paradigm, it would stand to reason that if you wanted to elicit this, then periodic, specifically timed periods off could help you kind of experience this then, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, if damage is the outcome that you're looking for, that's correct. Now, here's one thing that really needs to be taken into account. Just because you're not getting soreness doesn't mean there's not damage occurring. It's really, so when we talk about the repeated bout effect, it's not necessarily that there's less damage, although usually that's somewhat the case too, but that it's the nociceptors and the pain aspects are deadened so that your body becomes used to that to a greater degree and within the strengthening. So it doesn't mean, again, I want to make it clear that just because we're not getting sore doesn't mean the damage isn't happening. That isn't the case. And the other side of the coin, which I think is really important, which some people tend to gauge their workout on how sore they or how much damage they get. Too much damage is definitely a negative. So it is certainly not a good thing to be damaged. If you really damage your muscles, not only is it not helping you grow, that's like getting that sunburn we talked about, where you're burned beyond repair.
Well, now let's expand on this, because there's a phenomenon now that I talked about this on Casual Friday, and I talked about it also on the TV show recently. There's a fellow who writes for the Courier Journal here in Louisville who's a friend of the show, and he and I don't agree on everything, which is healthy, but we have scientific decorum and respect for each other, and you know, he has his opinions, I have mine, and he recently wrote an article pandering, in my opinion, to people out there who are now starting to get the resistance training message, as that resistance training is a critical portion of the longevity prescription, in my humble opinion. But there is a phenomenon out there, and it's being driven, quite frankly, by CrossFit. and that is that certain individuals are developing rhabdomyolysis, which is such an amazing amount of breakdown in the muscles that the kidneys get clogged up, and this phenomenon does not occur by accident. I want to make sure. I want to ask you if I'm wrong about this, but when somebody is pushing themselves to the point where they are developing rhabdo, is it possible that they've done this workout and thought, gee, this was just my average workout. I'm going to go home, and then all of a sudden, oh my God, something's wrong with me?
No, I mean, not unless there would be some real pathologic issue within themselves, and they should be supervised under that context anyway. So there's no question that you don't just get that by accident.
Right.
And the issue, I think it is a very important thing, the issue with CrossFit, and this is something that I think is not or needs to be discussed to a greater extent, is that the CrossFit method, and this here I'm giving somewhat my opinion, it can be a valid method of, or the overall concept of it for those who want general fitness. CrossFit, if you're looking for just some general strength and muscular endurance, etc., you can use the template of CrossFit and get good results. The issue is in how it's being carried out, and I think that's a really important thing that you point out. And there's multiple things that I think really need to be addressed here from a CrossFit workout, and that's probably a topic for another day. But from this particular perspective, a really bad aspect of many of the CrossFit paradigms is that you just need to train all out, balls to the wall, every time you're in the gym. And that, number one, will lead to overtraining at the very least. And like you said, in some of the instances where they push these people to the point where puking is a badge of courage, that certainly can lead to overdoing it to the point where you get rhabdo, and it's been shown.
You know, I got to be honest with you. I've been training now for 15 years, and I have always trained to very great extremes. I train as hard as I can. I am sensible. I constantly am monitoring my body. I don't go into the gym with the attitude that I'm going to wreck myself. I have never, ever trained, especially on leg days, I have never, ever trained to the point where I felt like I had to vomit. And I used to eat pre-workout meals. So I can't even imagine what that feels like. Like, how could you, first of all, if there's food in your stomach that soon in front of a workout, you're getting to the gym too soon and you're eating too late, one or the other, because you want the food to be an hour away from your workout at least, so it's not there in your stomach. So, I mean, vomiting during a workout is indicative of there's food in your stomach. It's not indicative of how hard you trained. It's because your body's going, holy crap, we have to do all this work. Forget about sending resources to the stomach to digest this food right now, and the food sits there and ferments for a while, and then you vomit it up.
Well, that can be part of it, but you can actually vomit water, and so the vomit is both. It has dual connotation. Certainly, the food can exacerbate it and make you vomit more. First of all, vomit more, as well as having it happen more easily, more readily. But people can vomit with very little food in their that's in their stomach. So
right.
You can vomit up water and whatever's in there. It also is a sign that you've just taken your body to a point where it doesn't want to go, and it's
ill. It's ill now. You're ill now.
Yeah,
that's what
correct.
Yeah, yep. Interesting. But this whole phenomenon of rhabdo, I have to believe that individuals who suffer rhabdo, they experience acute muscle soreness during the workout, where you are doing such damage to the muscle that it is painful to continue to work out, and they, like idiots, continue to work out.
Yeah, and we actually discussed this Brett and I discussed this in the review article itself, that if certainly the thought that, hey, I'm going to walk out, and a lot of trainers have this, it's kind of their badge of courage, if they can make the person so sore they can't sit down on the toilet bowl, to do their thing, that shows how great a trainer they are, which really just shows how little they understand exercise science. And that can be, not only is it counterproductive just in the sense that you've worked the muscle past the point where it can properly repair itself, and you're not going to be able to train again, generally at that point for a week or so, which is certainly, we know, not a good thing, but also that you could have done injury that can actually cause severe sickness, illness, and potentially even death.
Does delayed onset muscle soreness and the exercise-induced muscle damage have any linkage to the metabolic buildup that we've talked about in past interviews that does seem to elicit the type of response we want from the muscles during a workout, which you experience it during the pump and the congestion phases, and we know that there's a lot of growth factors and all sorts of good things that are happening in the muscle. Is there any crossover from either of those, the exercise-induced muscle damage or the delayed onset muscle soreness?
No, zero. And this was that was kind of the old school thought. I know back in the 90s it was perpetrated a lot that lactic acid was responsible, which are the metabolites, some of the metabolites that we're talking about here that can drive a hypertrophic response. But lactate actually is remetabolized within an hour or so post-workout, and the hydrogen ions are rapidly buffered and cleared as well. So the time course is not even a question that there's no correlation there.
And one last question, and then when we come back from the break, we're going to pick up on this a little bit further. I have some more questions that go back to some of your previous discussions as well. Is there any indication that substrate utilization can influence exercise-induced muscle damage and/or DOMS? For instance, we know that individuals who are mildly to moderately insulin resistant can suffer from what is it called now? Lactic acidosis, for instance. You know, because the muscles just don't metabolize glucose fast enough and well enough to do the kind of exercise. Any linkage in there?
I have not seen any research looking at that, at least that I can recall, so that's an interesting question, but I do not remember seeing any research that would shed light on that.
Okay. All right, let's do this. Let's take a quick commercial break. When we come back, we're going to pick it up. We're talking with Brad Schoenfeld.
I would easily say that I am the hugest proponent you will ever meet to doing anything that will improve the quality of my sleep. And that's because sleep is linked to just about every metabolic disorder we see in our population today. One of the easiest things you can do to improve the quality of your sleep is to get a pillow that can be shaped into the exact form factor that allows you to get your best night's sleep. And that is MyPillow. I've been sleeping with MyPillow for a few years now, and I can tell you that when I have to travel and stay in hotels, I don't get a good night's sleep because I don't have MyPillow with me. Right now, you can save up to 60% off of everything offered to improve the quality of your sleep at shrnetwork.biz/mypillow when you use the code SHR. Or you can call toll-free 800-889-4938. And remember to use code SHR to save up to 60% off of everything at their website.
Dogs should be powered by fat and protein, not carbs. That's why Visionary Pet makes low-carb, ketogenic dog food for dogs of all breeds and life stages. From kibble to freeze-dried and even low-carb treats, all Visionary Pet recipes are very low-carb, ketogenic, and made with 100% real meat protein. Shop now and use code SHR for 20% off your first order today. Your dog deserves the lifelong benefits of optimal nutrition. Make the switch to Visionary and see why smart dogs eat low carb.
There are lots of concerns about food supply today. That's why you need White Oak Pastures. White Oak Pastures will deliver food right to your doorstep. You don't even have to go out and be disappointed by shopping in grocery stores. The finest beef, pork, lamb, duck, and more can be found at White Oak Pastures. And now they even have seafood. And best of all, White Oak Pastures has a negative carbon footprint, which means that you don't have to feel guilty for eating your ribeye. Go to shrnetwork.biz/whiteoak and use the code SUPERHUMAN to save 15% off. P3OM from Bioptimizers is a patented prebiotic and probiotic supplement with Lactobacillus plantarum OM. It has now been upgraded to P3OM 2.0 with the addition of a superfood formulation that makes it 2 times stronger, as well as optimizes L. plantarum's strength. So it's more powerful than ever, which means that not only will it help you completely digest all animal proteins, it also reduces cortisol, causes deep relaxation and better sleep, and reduces stress. Go to shrnetwork.biz/P3-OM today and use the code SHR10 to save 10% off. Remember those rectangular toaster pastries you used to love when you were a kid? Well, Legendary Foods has just made them better. The new cake-style tasty pastry is like nothing you've ever had before. With 20 grams of high-quality protein and less than 1 gram of sugar, you'll feel like you're cheating, but you're not. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use the code SHR10 to save 10% off your purchase of tasty pastries. Now available in
cookies and
strong.
cream, red velvet
Feel
cake,
younger.
birthday cake,
It's
blueberry,
Superhuman Radio.
strawberry.
Brown sugar cinnamon.
We're talking with
and
Brad
hot fudge
Schoenfeld.
sundae. Go to
We're really the discussion is how do we get the most
and use code
efficient
SHR10
amount
today.
of muscle growth when working intelligently to stimulate that muscle growth. I think that's what everybody really, really wants. So let's talk a little bit about the metabolic buildup of exercise that we've talked about in previous discussions, because it seems to me, after this research paper that both you and Brett Contreras published, that we come back to that as being a better indicator and influence on the adaptation process of muscle. Am I incorrect?
Well, you're partially correct. Now, remember that there's really three mechanisms, as I've outlined in previous research, that do drive hypertrophy, and one of them is mechanical tension. So, and by the way, I will say, and hopefully when I am finished with my study, I will come back on your show and give you the lowdown, but I'm currently involved, my dissertation work is looking at a volume-equated powerlifting style routine versus a hypertrophy-type routine. And in trained subjects, by the way, which has never been done before, and looking to see if there's any differences in hypertrophy and strength. So it's going to be real interesting, but the powerlifting style routine does not build up. You don't get much metabolic buildup. You're training in the phosphagen system, so you're really not getting much glycolysis, anaerobic glycolysis, and thus there's little metabolic buildup. So simply training with very heavy loads can also drive a hypertrophic response, as we know.
Yeah, but you know what? That's an interesting observation, because when you look at a bodybuilder and you look at a powerlifter, quite often, and this stands to be I'm going to make a generalization here, and anytime you generalize, you run the risk of looking like a jerk. But, you look at a bodybuilder who's got 21-inch upper arms, and you look at a powerlifter who has 19 or 20-inch upper arms, and you find out that the powerlifter his arms are much stronger than the bodybuilders. So it looks like there might be, again, and this is a discussion that I had many, many years ago, right? So strength and hypertrophy do not necessarily dwell in the same domain, because strength could be an adaptation of neuromuscular efficiency, while hypertrophy is an adaptation of structural muscle changes.
That's true too, and here's, for, I think one of the other real important things to consider, and there's multiple factors. Number one is fiber typing, that you might be getting more adaptations in type 1 fibers with bodybuilders due to higher rep training. So that's certainly a hypothesis that can be taken on. There's also sarcoplasmic elements. You're getting greater glycogen, generally, because you're training more glycolytic, you're going to get greater glycogen adaptations and thus get greater intracellular water content. So that could be, so there's multiple things, and this is something that I am exploring in my dissertation work.
And then I guess the other thing is, what do you really want? So do you want to look strong, or do you want to be strong? And that's, everything in life comes down to, what are your endpoints, right? In your life, and your job, and your career,
yep.
your relationship with the person you're with. What are your endpoints? So if your endpoints are, I want to have the biggest possible muscles, because I want to look really, really strong, but not necessarily have a one-to-one relationship with size versus strength. And then there's other guys who are like, I just want to be really strong. I really don't care if I look strong. I just want to be really strong. And I think that the endpoints will dictate what kind of training you should apply. Or am I off base? Do you think you can do both?
No, you are absolutely on base, Carl, but here's what I'll say too, is that there's a continuum. So people use these terms. You're going to get stronger from doing bodybuilding training. You're going to get bigger doing powerlifting training. So it then comes down to, where is the line that you want to draw? Uh-huh. So, it's kind of also this, I'll kind of get off tangent, but it's really relative here, or related, in that you often hear about bodybuilding being non-functional. You'll hear these terms, and it's ridiculous. I mean, show me a bodybuilder that can't lift up packages or a child and do their functional tasks. So, yeah, is it optimal? Is bodybuilding style what you'd want to do if you're a baseball player, or if you're looking to be a farmer or something? No, obviously there's the principle of specificity would apply, but there is a continuum, and this is often missed, that it's not, well, you're just going to get bigger muscles, or just get stronger, or just get more functional. There is a large overlap between these factors, and people that want to simplify them really are doing an injustice to the training.
Now, here's an interesting question that I've just started to think about, right? Flexing the muscle. So, because I can't train legs right now, what I have been relegated to do right now, other than very, very, minimal body weight type squatting things because of my left hamstring is torn, but I find that I can lock my knees out and flex my quadricep muscles with such force that they accumulate those metabolic waste products that you would experience during a pump movement, if you will. Do you think that has any effect on muscle structure, muscle strength, or anything, or is that just chewing gum for the muscles? Can it do anything?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, there are studies using blood flow restriction in bedridden patients where all they do is they do acute intermittent tying off restriction of the veins, and they attenuate atrophy. So people do not lose muscle at nearly the same rate. Basically, they maintain their muscle at a much greater rate than those who don't get this, and it's theorized that that's due to metabolic buildup, or at least that might have some factor within it. So, certainly now, if you're looking to optimize muscle development, you're not going to get it just from posing, which is basically what you're talking about. But if you can, because you're not going to overload the muscle to the degree that it needs. But certainly you can prevent, if you're unable to train, you can prevent atrophy, and depending upon where you're at, I mean, for an untrained person, they can increase muscle just by flexing.
What about flexing as an adjunct to a workout? So in other words, you train really, really hard one day, and then that evening or the next day, you flex those muscles with such great force that you get that same burning sensation. You do that over and over again for a period of time. Can that kind of re-stimulate or add a little extra oomph to the process?
Never seen a study on it. It's actually something that I've hypothesized about a lot. One thing for sure is that posing does help to enhance muscular control, so you can get a better mind-to-muscle connection with muscles that allows you to become more in tune with your musculature. I think that's one of the things that bodybuilders are really able to get this, this good control, so you're able to enhance the muscle growth. So
yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and you know what? There's a lot to be said for mind-muscle connection, but it's lost by many people, because what I've experienced in my own life is I lose the mind-muscle connection once I start getting into the heavier weights that I'm lifting. It's really, really hard for me to feel a given muscle doing the work. It's easy for me to feel it when I'm warming up, and even maybe my first 3 warm-up sets of something. But then once I get to that 4th, 5th, and 6th set where I'm now increasing my load dramatically, that all goes out the window. So if the mind-muscle connection is an effective way to stimulate adaptation in the muscle, there may be something to be said for training sessions where you just don't go as heavy as you can, but you focus more on feeling the work being done by the muscles.
No question. That and that's kind of an unloading. It goes along with the unloading. That certainly we know that, as we talked about before, if you keep training at a high level all the time, you're going to rapidly overtrain. So training quality should be a focus, and that I've always preached that, and I think it's a very important aspect of optimizing results.
We're going to take our last commercial break. When we come back, I'm just curious, have you looked at any of the new heart rate monitoring and heart rate variability products and processes out there to gauge where you are in your training cycle? Have you looked at any of those at all?
I have. I mean, I've glanced at some of the claims about it. That's not an area that I've really investigated to a great degree. I've been so focused in my dissertation type research on hypertrophy that kind of has taken a back seat, so I haven't looked at it, and I know there's some conflicting data out there.
Brad, do you have any opinions on assessing overtraining? There's a lot of people out there that are trying to put their hands around this now. It becomes a very popular subject. What do you think?
Yeah, and unless you're going to do things like saliva testing, which is expensive, you're not going to really get an accurate gauge on it, or really you're not going to be able to get a really objective gauge. It's more subjective, and what you need to do is to be aware of the signs. And one of the biggest ones is a decrement in performance. Now, a decrement in performance doesn't necessarily, that can just be due to the fact that your training isn't, that you need to change around your routine and stuff. But if you're generally see results and you start seeing a plateau, you want to start then investigating other factors, and things like increased injury. If you start getting little nagging injuries, that's certainly a one gauge. Sickness, if you're starting to get flu-like symptoms where you're not feeling well. And one of the biggest ones that I always look for is a general lethargy with training, where workouts start to or stop becoming fun at that point, or stop becoming interesting to you, and you lose your drive to train. And really, it's again a subjective measure there, because you're not going to be able to look at your test levels versus your cortisol levels, and you have to start just being in tune with the other surrounding factors. And another one, by the way, is sleep disturbances. That's generally more severe cases. You start to get sleep disturbances as well.
What about grip strength? Have you heard anything about grip strength being an indicative of overtraining?
I have not, or I might have. I think I've not seen any direct research on that. It might be the case. I'm not sure how you'd really, unless you're going to have a dynamometer that you go out and buy. I'm not sure how you'd objectively measure that.
Yeah, that's true. And then the last one that's intriguing to me is this tap test, right? So you pick a key on your keyboard, you say 15 seconds, you tap it for as many times as you can for 15 seconds after you've been well rested to get a baseline. And then you do this again and again as you train, and theoretically, as you become more overtrained, you slow down on how many keys you can tap accurately in 15 seconds.
I have not seen that validated. That's an interesting if that really would pan out. I'd also be curious as to whether that's, because remember that resistance training can be somewhat different than from a systemic standpoint than aerobic training can. There's different responses to it, so yeah. It's possible.
So anyway, the bottom line is this from the most recent research, that is that while you may experience some delayed onset muscle soreness, it is not indicative of whether or not you've had a productive workout and or whether you're going to experience new muscular adaptation.
Correct. Yeah, and that those who are judging the workout based upon how sore they are, not only are they missing the boat, and again, as I said, it could be, we mentioned, there could be at least some indication that you've worked the muscle in a novel way if you keep doing the same exercises over and over again. We've talked in the past about before the benefits of variety in a routine for when hypertrophy is the goal. So changing around your movements is a good thing in that context. And it can be a general, the fact you get a little sore should be somewhat indicative of that. But just general workout quality, it does not mean you're growing or not growing, depending upon whether you're sore or not.
That's
great. So it shouldn't be used.
So there you go. Great information, as always, from Brad Schoenfeld. Hey, Brad, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Always a pleasure, Carl. Look forward to doing this again.
Take care. Thank you for listening to Superhuman Radio today, and we'll see you tomorrow.